And I just wanted to go over with you the main message of your presentation, particularly the distinctions you make between different roadmaps to understand the processes of change in rural areas and in food and farming.
I distinguish these roadmaps as being one, a simple promotion of technology, starting with the scientist's invention and then the transfer to farmers eventually, who are always called ultimate users. So they're just users. They're not people who have their own knowledge or their own creativity or their own research. That's totally out of the question. And then came the great idea of participatory technology development, which your institute has really provided a lot of leadership in that field. But again, the focus is on technology. And that means the focus is implicitly on yields per hectare at the farm level. So that notion is not being explicitly mentioned, but the criterion that is implicitly used always is yields per hectare. So it's always implicitly that criterion. So everybody says, yes, that's the future of agriculture, but it isn't, because there is the markets, there is the access to land, there is the access to inputs and credit, there is also the whole notion that agricultural markets, because there are so many small entrepreneurs, eventually destroy themselves. So you have to do something about that. So that is the second perspective, where in the early years after the Second World War, in Europe, but especially in the United States, the situation was created where the institutions had developed to a point and the markets had developed to a point that one could drop a technology like hybrid maize into a farming population and it would spread and affect the macro situation. And so economists started researching that, and then they developed the second roadmap, which is this, what I call the treadmill, which is a neoliberal perspective that really looks at the free market of agricultural products, a huge market, and the effects of dropping a technology in a population of farmers that has access to this huge market. And so that second roadmap really describes how the people who are early in adopting this technology capture a benefit because nobody else is doing it yet. So you capture the benefit of higher productivity or lower costs or whatever the technology provides. But then, as that benefit becomes known, the technology spreads very rapidly, and in the end, everybody has to now adopt it, because people who, and that's the tragedy of people who do as before, who are just continuing to work as before, as hard as before, as clever as before, their incomes go down. They say, hey, I've got 20 cows and it used to be enough, what's happening? So then they're forced to adopt, but by that time, of course, it's too late. It doesn't really pay anymore. So that's the cleverness of that treadmill notion. It impels, it propels agriculture through introducing technology. It propels this innovation process. And in the end, of course, people drop out. They can't stay with it. They're unable to follow. They're too small. They don't have the capacity. And so there is a very rapid loss of employment in agriculture. So that's the second roadmap. And then, the third really, because we've talked about technology push, the first one, or the promotion of technology through research, then the participatory technology development, and then this treadmill. And really they're all about technology, because the treadmill also is being fueled by the introduction of technology. And so then comes the idea, how can you ask attention for institutions? And my experience is that scientists and neoliberal economists are totally blind to the role of institutions, totally blind. So I'm quite happy that the two people who received the Nobel Prize in Economics now are institutional economists. But it doesn't mean that suddenly everything is rosy, because even the institutional economists are still all about, how do you increase incomes and how do you increase national product, and not necessarily about about, let's say, institutions as the way to embed these crude processes like the competitive markets and the treadmill into something that provides equity, provides a human perspective on life and so on. And that's nobody's worried about that. Anyway, let me rest my case for a moment, maybe to. Yeah.
The approach, the framework that takes into account institutions in innovation and in planning for food and agriculture. Could you tell us a little bit more about that framework, that particular roadmap?
Number one is a realization that institutions are everywhere and how much they affect us and in what ways they affect us, how we submit to them. But also the second thing is that they are changeable, that somebody can do something about them. Once farmers begin to realize that, I think they have enormous power to change things for themselves and to begin to shape and to influence the kind of institutional environment that they live in and that they work with. A very simple example is how middlemen destroy farmers' incomes and how through cooperatives you can, and that's what happened in many countries, how through cooperatives you can actually, break the power of these middlemen and create a greater share of the wealth generated for the farmers themselves. That's a typical example. But it requires trust, it requires leadership, it requires discipline. And that's always the problem, because commercial companies can always try and break these cooperatives by offering better prices for a short while and so on and so forth. So there's always that struggle, but it can be done.
Yeah. But for researchers and research institutes to adopt that more comprehensive roadmap, what's it going to take? What are the implications for research?
Yes, good point.
We're thinking of changing research away from these rather simplistic roadmaps to a more comprehensive approach that's capable of addressing the social, environmental and economic challenges ahead of us at this point in time. What needs to change in research? What are the implications?
Well, I think the challenges, as you say, are really enormous in terms of we're on a life cycle of a way of doing things that is coming to an end in terms of the resources we have, in terms of the utilization of land, in terms of number of people we have to feed, in terms of the end of oil, and also very much in terms of climate change, because that's going to affect a lot of the things we assume to be normal at the moment. So there's these tremendous challenges, and it's not a question of changing nature, it's a question of changing people. Because all these challenges are, with a nice word, anthropogenic. They've been generated by people's behavior, uncontrolled people's behavior. So one of the key points for research will become not so much how do we control rivers or how do we control the weather, those kind of things, but which of course some researchers want to do by seeding the clouds with stuff. But the question will be much more, how do we create societies that are sustainable? In terms of their human behavior, in terms of the kind of institutions we have. So I think a big change that is required in research is an ability to do research on institutions and to suggest other types of institutions. Now I'm not quite sure whether research is the only answer, because of course these issues are also very political. So, but I think if research were on the side of institutional development and institutional innovation, and weren't only in terms of promoting technology, but we're also making people aware. And if you train researchers to be not just technically oriented, but to realize that within any technology is also an institution and has its institutional ramifications. If you would start training researchers in that sense, and beginning to create awareness in universities and in agricultural schools and in agricultural research institutes of this dimension of development, I think that would already go a long way in creating a totally different dialogue.
So changes in the education system, the training of researchers,
Exactly.
presumably their reward structure.
Exactly.
Do you see any other changes in the organization of research needed for that body of people to embrace this new paradigm?
Yeah. If you really take seriously institutions and the possibility of creating human institutions that really create equity and a sustainable society, then the governance of institutions has to become accountable to those kind of needs. So that is really the key issue, I think. Now, how do you do that? I think it's partly, of course, elected parliaments who should become much more aware of the need to make research accountable to those kind of things. But I think it's and that's why I'm so very, very impressed with this initiative to develop these citizens' juries. I think that these kind of juries can actually formulate the kind of issues that the research institutes should address, and also formulate the kind of responsiveness that is required.
You mentioned this citizen jury, this citizen space for democratic debate. What went through your mind? How have you experienced this personally? What does this represent for you?
Well, first I was of course very impressed with the kind of people that are in this jury, in terms of the sophistication of their questions, and not only to me but also to the other guys who came to present. Also, I was, disquieted a little bit by the easy persuasion of the technical argument to get them back into that thinking and believing that technology is the source of agricultural development. So that is a danger. But I think that I was most impressed by the ability of the whole process to get back on track and really think about what it takes for small farmers to develop. And one is struck, of course, by the enormous challenges. Like this one woman said, okay, if you bring the money into government, it becomes projects, and we won't see a penny of it. I mean, so they're very aware of their own institutional failures in that sense. So that's very heartening, very, very heartening. And for them to be able to express this and to think all these days to really formulate a common perspective, I haven't heard this common perspective, I look forward very much to getting that and the recommendations that come out of this process.